In October 1347, Genoese trading ships entered the port at Messina, Sicily. The men aboard these ships were either dead or dying in their hundreds. The ships had come from the east, and with them had brought back deadly disease. One contemporary chronicler wrote that when these ships arrived home, it was as if they had brought evil spirits with them. Soon enough, it became apparent that this disease was unlike any other in living memory. Infection spread quickly, and soon every city, every settlement, every place was poisoned by the contagious pestilence. The diseased sailors had come from the Black Sea port of Jaffa, where the Genoese had a trading post. For 2 years, they had been under siege from the armies of Mongols and Turks. Greatly outnumbered, they believed defeat and death would come soon. Then, out of the blue, rumour circulated that disease had struck the enemy. A merciless pestilence that caused the coughing up of blood and grotesque boils and black blotches on the skin. At this point, the Genoese sailors must have thought they had been saved. But the leader of the enemy, Khan Janibeg, had one awful trick up his sleeve. For months, he had been bombarding the Genoese with boulders flung from catapult machines. But now he ordered the dead to be loaded onto the machines and flung towards the Genoese merchants. As soon as the bodies landed in the port, the Genoese were as good as dead, although they didn't know this. A contemporary writer described mountains of corpses raining down on the port, and the Christians could not escape. The Genoese dumped the corpses in the water, but this only slightly abated the pestilence. Soon, the water supply was poisoned, and with the disease ravaging the port, a small band of sailors made for home, unaware that the disease which they brought with them would have a devastating impact on their homeland and the whole of Europe. Rumours of a disease had emerged the previous year. With its origin in China, it supposedly had spread through Central Asia to India, Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Asia Minor. All of India was said to be struck down. The total of reported dead at this point, as calculated by Pope Clement VI, was approximately 24 million. Europe, however, had remained untouched. That is, until the ships arrived in Sicily. By early 1348, the disease had spread to France via Marseille and North Africa via Tunis. By June, it had spread through Spain, all of Italy, and onto Bordeaux, Paris, Normandy, and across the Alps to Switzerland and eastwards to Hungary. By late August, it arrived on the shores of southern Britain. A cleric from Osney Abbey in Oxfordshire described people who had one day been full of happiness, the next were found dead. The dead bore signs of plague: black swellings the size of an apple in the armpits and groin that oozed with blood and pus, followed by black blotches and boils on the skin and internal bleeding. The infected suffered severe pain and suffering and died within 5 days of the first symptoms. As the disease spread, coughing up blood appeared in place of the buboes. These died even quicker, some within 24 hours. The cause of the plague was unknown to the people of the 14th century. Today, we know the disease started by fleas which infected rodents. The disease lived in the stomach of the flea and the bloodstream of the rat who held host to it. These were so ubiquitous in medieval Europe that they were not even considered to be the source of the deadly disease. The great medieval minds believed the disease to be passed through the air, miasma, or thick mists, or misaligned planets. And obviously, this was thought to be the wrath of God. The plague was even likened to the biblical flood. Some cities, such as Rouen, banned anything they believed incurred the wrath of the Almighty: gambling, drinking, cursing, all the good stuff, in the hope it would stop the plague. Another method used to keep the plague at bay was the burning of herbs, and no, that didn't really work either, although Pope Clement survived by sitting in between 2 large burning fires, which probably deterred the fleas. Medical men of the time, usually monks, were wedded to the works of the Greek physician Galen, so bloodletting was their go-to remedy, which actually weakened the patient and probably didn't help at all, along with sprinkling the floor, hands, mouth and nostrils with vinegar and rosewater. The disease actually passed to humans via a bite from flea or rat, then from human to human. Pasteurella pestis, the actual plague, wasn't discovered until 500 years after the Black Death, which was obviously too late. It was described at the time as being like the end of the world, and in most European cities it was. Reported death rates in Europe were extremely high. Paris, for example, recorded a total of 800 dead a day through 1349, and they lost half of their population. Pisa, 500 a day. Vienna, 600 a day. Venice lost 2/3 of its population. Florence, 3 to 4/5. Hamburg and Bremen, 3 to 4/5 of its population. Cities were devastated, but so were villages. Givry, a village in Burgundy with a population of around 1,500, recorded 615 deaths in the space of 14 weeks, compared to an average of 30 deaths a year for the previous decade. In Cambridgeshire in England, manorial records of 3 villages show death rates of 47, 57 and 70%. Parents deserted their children and children their parents. In enclosed environments such as monasteries, if one person became infected, it almost always spelled the end for all of the inhabitants. The death rate was so high that people died without the last rites. There were either no clergymen to perform them, or they refused for fear of contamination. Mass burial pits or plague pits were common in larger settlements. In London, for example, bodies piled up in layers until they overflowed. In Florence, corpses were left on the streets and taken away by a group of people wearing red robes and hoods covering the face, except for the eyes. They called themselves Campagna della Misericordia, but even they couldn't remove every corpse, and many of the dead lay festering in the streets for weeks. Italy was perhaps the country that suffered the worst. With a population of around 10 million, it lost 2/3 of its inhabitants. Major building projects halted to a standstill as worker after worker died. In Siena, work on the cathedral, which was to be the largest in the world, completely stopped, never to be resumed. Whole families were wiped out, or in some cases, one member surviving, bearing witness to the destruction. Those who could afford to leave the larger towns and cities made their escape, like the wealthy young people in Boccaccio's Decameron who fled Florence to live in the countryside away from any people and roads. And yes, the poor suffered greater losses than the wealthy. This was remarked upon at the time in Scotland and Italy. In England, peasants dropped dead on the roads, in their houses, and in the fields. One chronicler described seeing 5,000 dead in one English field. Because of this, animals wandered freely through the countryside, but these too succumbed to the pestilence in their thousands. Lawlessness and debauchery became commonplace, with people stealing from the dead. Then came the Flagellants. Barefoot, stripped to the waist, carrying relics, weeping, they travelled from town to town in their hundreds, beating themselves with whips tipped with iron spikes designed to make the user bleed like Christ, in the hope that this would act as penance for the sins of man. In every place they collected more numbers, and most probably helped the spread of the disease. There was also a sinister side to the self-torturers. In each town they would head for the Jewish quarter and massacre the people there. This was due to many medieval people believing wrongly that the Jews were poisoning wells and causing the deaths. Finally, in the early 1350s, the plague slowed. The survivors were left in a Europe where the disease had wiped out around 25 million people, 1/3 of its population. Due to the number of peasants that had died, those that were left were able to argue for better jobs, better pay, and lower rents, as there was a shortage of workers. The fortunes of the landlords declined. The church struggled to exert the same influence it had on the people before the plague. Since priests also died of the disease, accusations were made that the church itself must be wicked. For the first time, the church was being questioned. The Black Death had a devastating impact on the 14th century, making it the most deadly pandemic in medieval history. The effect on population was so dramatic that it wasn't until the 17th century that Europe recovered